So,
In progress.
here we go. So, have you ever wished, I know I have you ever wished that you could just take a peek into the future? Just take a look to see maybe what tomorrow's going to look like before it even happens, or maybe, uh, uh, look to see what the next year is going to bring about. Um, I think we probably have all wanted to do that at one time or another. Uh, in the book of Isaiah, chapters 40 through 66, the end of the book, Isaiah is talking about a time when the children of Israel are going to be living in Babylon in a captivity that was going to actually take place 70 years from the day that he wrote it, 70 years or so. And so he gives them a peek, a look into what their lives are going to be like. And although they understood that they were going to be in captivity, he wanted them to know that even though this bad thing was going to be going on, that God was still with them. I think one thing we can quickly think, I know I can, that when things are not the way I want them to be, that somehow God has deserted me. Somehow God has disappeared. And will show up later, maybe, or not show up at all, but he just kind of disappeared from the scene. And yet, Isaiah wants them to know that, look, this terrible thing's going to happen, and you're going to be there for a while, and it's not going to be good, but God is still with you. Even though your own sin took you into captivity, God's going to go with you anyway. That's what fathers do, right? Fathers stick with their children no matter how bad they are, no matter how terrible, no matter what kind of jerks they are. Fathers and mothers just stick with their children when nobody else will. And that's what Isaiah is telling them. In chapter 46, he talks about this. And wants to start in verse 1. Bel bows down, Nebo stoops low. Their idols are borne by beasts of burden. Bel and Nebo were the two main gods of Babylon. Bel was the main god. We get the name Baal from that. Nebo was kind of his son. Markor was his name, his Babylonian name. And so it says the father of gods, the Babylonian gods, and the son of God. I don't know if there's an analogy there or not, but it's there. Stoops low. Their idols are borne by beasts of burden. The images they are carried about are burdensome, a burden for the weary. They stoop and bow down together, unable to rescue the burden. They themselves go off into captivity. The Babylonian gods were burdensome. They were burdensome. They didn't provide relief. And when the Jews are going into Babylon, Isaiah is saying, don't fall for those guys. He said, they've been a burden to Babylon. They'll be a burden to you. Don't fall for it. Just kind of a free thought here. Don't 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 fall for something that's going to be a burden to you. Don't fall for a God or a relationship or whatever it is that's going to burden you, because it is not of God. Verse 2, he says something, he says at the very end, he says, they themselves go off into captivity. It was a common practice for the uh, nations back then that when they would go off to battle, they would take the images of their God, they would put them on a cart pulled by cattle or by donkeys or what cattle usually, and they would take them to the battlefield with them. And you knew the battle wasn't going well when your God was captured by the enemy and taken away from the battlefield. That was a terrible thing to happen. And he says, when they take their gods into battle, this is the very thing that's happened. Can you even imagine the absurdity? Think about this. Think about the absurdity of God being captured and taken away from you. We can't even imagine that thought. And yet he says here, that's what happens to their gods. Look down in verses 6 and 7. Some pour out gold from their bags and weigh out silvers on the scales. They hire a goldsmith to make it into a god, and they bow down and worship it. They lift it to their shoulders and carry it. They set it up in its place, and there it stands. And then notice what he says about them. He says, from that spot, it cannot move. Even though someone cries out to it, it cannot answer. It cannot save them from their troubles. You know, Isaiah's letting them know here, don't fall for these gods because they cannot move. Imagine God not being able to move. They cannot answer. God doesn't ever answer you. It cannot save them from their troubles. God does not have the ability to save. Yet, so many times today, we depend upon things that cannot move, cannot answer, that cannot save us from our troubles. And Isaiah says, don't fall for that. Don't fall for that God. But in verse 3, and then verses 8 through the end of the chapter is where I wants to pick up. He tells them why they need to depend upon God and why only God. Listen to me, you descendants of Jacob, all the remnant of the people of Israel, you whom I have upheld since your birth and have carried since you were born. Even to your old age and gray hairs, I am He. I am He who will sustain you. I have made you, and I will carry you. I will sustain you, and I will rescue you. Notice here the contrast. He says, that the gods of the Babylonians had to be carried, and God says, I am the God who carries. I will carry you. In fact, he says it two different times, and he uses two different words. First of all, he says, verse 3, he says, I've carried you since you were born. The word here for carry in this context means to gently carry, and it's the image of a mother carrying her newborn child. When you get a new baby, that's kind of a cool thing to carry, isn't it? They're they don't weigh as much. They're innocent. Maybe they're gurgling, when you're carrying them, maybe they're, making cute little sounds, and you carry them and everybody wants to see them, and you carry them, but you carry them very gently, and they're very special. And you do everything to make sure that you don't drop them. But then in verse 4, he says, I will carry you, but I will sustain you. And the word here for carry and sustain is a different word. It means to carry something that is hard to carry. It's like from carrying a newborn baby to carrying a bag of cement. It's that kind of difference. I thought carrying a bag of rocks. The difference in those two things is astronomically different. And yet God says here, I will carry you like a newborn baby when you're born, but when you're old age and you have gray hairs, which a lot of us have, right? Covered up or not, we still got them. Gray hairs, he says, I still will carry you. I will carry you even though it's like carrying a bag of cement or a bag of rocks. I am still with you. Sometimes we get thinking, I'm just a problem to God. I've got all these issues. I've got all this baggage. I've got all this luggage attached to me. And God says, I don't care. I will still carry you. I will still sustain you. I will rescue you like I did when you were a newborn baby and you were no problem to carry. Now you're a big old ugly bag of rocks. I'll still carry you anyway, and I still will sustain you. I think what Satan wants us to believe sometimes is that as we get older, we get more difficult to carry. We have more problems that come up, more things that, as we say, more baggage in our lives that God wants to drop us, but he does not. These people are in the middle of captivity that occurred because of their rebellion, of their opposing God, of their resisting God. And God says, I'll still carry you. I'll still be with you. Verse 5, with whom will you compare me or count me equal? To whom will you liken me that we may be compared? You see, you can't compare anything, anyone to God. Nothing can be compared to him. No relationship, no new job, no money in the bank. Nothing can be compared to God.
Amen.
Now, you say, is there a catch to being carried by God even when I have all these things in my life, they're not good? Is there seems like there should be a string attached to this. There should be a condition. In verses 8 through the end of the chapter, the overwhelming answer is yes, there is. Now, probably some of us thought I was going to say, oh, no strings attached. There's a string attached. There's a condition for this to happen. Verse 8, remember this, keep it in mind, take it to heart, you rebels. See, we still, we still are rebels, aren't we? I'm still a rebel in my heart. I'm still rebellious in my heart. There are times I know when I ought to do things that I ought to do, and I just don't do them because I don't want to. I just don't want to. You need to go pray. Well, I don't want to go pray right now. You ought to be nice to Christy. Well, I don't want to be nice to Christy right now. Just rebellious. And God says, I know you still have rebellion in your heart. God says, if you want me to be with you, there's a string attached. Remember the former things, those of long ago. First of all, I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me. I read the other day that some Hindus believe that there are 330 million gods. Right now, in all the religions of America, in the world, excluding the Hindus, there are 18,000 gods recognized in the world. And God says, I am God and there is no other. I am God and there's none like me. We need to realize that there is no one else but God. Now, I'm going to throw this in here, and I want you to think about it. If you got a problem me saying it, call me. Say, Gary, I didn't like that. But I want to talk about this just for a minute. We have to be so careful, brothers and sisters. When we start talking about Pele and we start talking about Maui, because they're part of the Hawaiian culture, and we start talking about them as if they really, really existed. A few years ago, when Kilauea erupted, our mayor was praying to Pele that it would stop. Every morning he said, I pray to Pele. Listen, there is no other God but God. Well, it's cultural. I don't know what it is. I don't care. God says there's no other God and there's none like me. And we need to embrace that and not fall for a worldly perspective of all that. Verse 10, I made known the end from the beginning, from ancient times when it's still to come. And here's that little catch I was talking about, that little string that was attached. I say, my purpose will stand and I will do what I please. See, we've got to believe that's what's going on in the world. And when all these things happen in the world, that God's purpose will stand and he will do what he pleases. And we have to be happy. We have to submit to, we have to be content with, we have to embrace the idea that God's going to do what he pleases, and that's the way it is. I want you to look at a couple of verses with me, if you would. First of all, hold your place here. Go to Job chapter 23. Job chapter 23. And then we're going to look at one in Psalms. The first one is in Job 23. Job 23:13 through 16. Job 23:13 through 16. But he stands alone, and who can oppose him? He does whatever he pleases. He carries out his decree against me, and many such plans he still has in stone. You see, the plans of God are in stone. He does what he pleases. Job says, that's why I'm terrified before him. When I think of all this, I fear him. God has made my heart faint. The Almighty has terrified me. He said, it's pretty terrifying to think that God does what he pleases. His plans are in stone, and I can't do anything about it. Psalms chapter 33. Psalms 33, 10 and 11. The psalmist says basically the same thing. Psalms 33, 10 and 11. The Lord foils the plans of the nations. He thwarts the purposes of the peoples. But the plans of the Lord stand firm forever, the purposes of his heart through all generations. See, God foils. I don't know what plans the nations have going on today, what the plans of Israel are, what the plans of Palestine are, what the plans of Russia, of Ukraine, what the plans of wherever, America, whatever our plans are, the plans of the state of Hawaii. But God foils the plans of the nations. He thwarts the purposes of his people. His plans stand firm forever, and the purposes of his heart through all generations. What's the catch to trusting in God? We've got to submit to his plans, his purposes, and the purposes of his heart, and be content that God's will be done. He will do what he pleases. Go back to Isaiah chapter 46, verse 10b. He says, I will do what I please. Basically, this is saying you have no say in what I'm going to do. God says to us, this is what I'm going to do. You have no say in it. In our world, we don't like the idea of that, do we? We really don't like that. We think about, we use words like collaboration, a meeting of the minds, consensus, being on the same page, and we try and take that view of our heart to God and say, well, let's get on the same page here. Listen, between us and God, we have no page. There is no page. It's God's page. That's the only page. God will not collaborate with us. Will he hear us? Will he listen to us? Yes. But in the end, he's going to do what he pleases, what he wants done. And we just need to realize that. And we need to get comfortable with that. We need to embrace that. I had this friend in Atlanta. His name is Clyde Whitworth. And Clyde Whitworth is about 6'4", 6'5". He's a big guy. And when he had three little kids his three little children, had a son, two daughters, and his little boy Spencer was the oldest. Spencer was just kind of like out of control. You have one of those kids just kind of like running all over the place, out of control, constantly fighting with the parents. He was just this little guy who was just a little rebel. And so one day, Clyde had enough. And he picked Spencer up by the shoulders and he pulled him up to where they were faced eye to eye. And I know when Spencer looked down, he probably looked like he was about 10 feet off the ground. I mean, he just had him up here like that. And he said, Spencer, you got to do what your mom and I say to do, simply because we are bigger than you. And he set him down. And he said that just kind of clicked in his little boy's head. I'm doing what my parents said because you know what? They are much, much bigger than me. And I'm just going to do it. And I think God looks at us and he says, here's the truth. My plans are going to be carried out because I am bigger than you. I am God and you are not. I know what I am doing. I have done this before. I've been down this road before. I've been down this road from eternity. I've been down this road generation after generation after generation. My plan has always worked. It has never failed. I will do what I please. Get on board with me. What I have said, I will bring about. What I have planned, I will do. Verse 12. Listen to me, you stubborn hearted, right? You are now far from my righteousness. But I know you're far from my righteousness, but I'm going to bring my righteousness near. It is not far away. My salvation will not be delayed. I will grant salvation to Zion, my splendor to Israel. And even though we might be stubborn hearted and rebellious, God says, I'm going to bring my righteousness near to you. I will bring it to you because I want you to realize that I'm doing what I please, and I want you to agree with me. Someone once wrote, the Lord is the potter of history. The Lord is the potter of history. God says, I am the potter. You are the clay. The clay doesn't say to the potter, why did you make me thus? Why did you make me like this? The clay says to the potter, may your will be done and not mine. May God help all of us, brothers and sisters, to please, please, please submit to the will of God and let God do what he pleases. Thank you, guys. Thank you for listening this morning.